Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We have in studio with us Texas Senator Van Taylor, who's going to be running for Congress. We'll be talking about that in just a minute. Let me first of all say thank you for Friday, when Colonel Alan West sat in this chair when I was out of country. And then yesterday we had Dr. Merrill Matthews sit in this chair. So I want to thank both of them for sitting in this chair. But I'm back, and we are excited about the fact that we have Van Taylor with us. Individual that first, of course, I knew him when he ran for the Texas House and did very well there. Was my own representative for a time, and then ran for the Texas Senate. Was also my representative. So I've certainly followed his career. Before he, of course, served in the Texas House and Senate, was a Marine officer and paratrooper. Captain Taylor, of course, was very involved as a platoon commander. We can talk about some of the other aspects of what he has been involved with. But he is now running for the 3rd Congressional District, and that is one that's been held many years by Representative Sam Johnson. Not the Sam Johnson that is running a runoff tonight. We'll have to talk about that in just a minute. Sure. But Van Taylor, always great to have you in studio with us.
Great to be with you. Great to be with all your listeners.
Let's talk about that for just a minute.
Sure.
You will not know who your opponent is till tonight.
Right.
And it could be Lori Birch. It could be Sam Johnson.
Right.
But, if it was Sam Johnson, I'm not sure that it would be. If it was, you've got a bit of an issue, because I was talking to somebody the other day that's from Parker County, an elected official who texted me and said, I thought Sam Johnson was a Republican. And I thought, if an elected official does not know that this guy is using the name to run, you would have, if indeed he won, kind of an issue of educating all the voters, wouldn't you?
Well, look, whoever the nominee is on the other side, we're certainly going to go out and roll out our vision, our positive vision about how to make America better, and certainly talk about the things that we've been able to get done in the Texas legislature, and not only being conservative, but working on a bipartisan basis to get things done for the people of Texas and the people of Collin County.
Is it fair to say that you are the most conservative senator in Texas?
There are certainly many rating systems that have said Van Taylor is the most conservative member of the Texas Senate, and I'm very proud to be a taxpayer champion. I've actually been a taxpayer champion. So Texans for Fiscal Responsibility goes through, and they rank the members of the legislature, and I've been a taxpayer champion every session I've served for four. And people tell me they want a fiscal conservative. They want someone that's going to fight to pinch the pennies and make sure that we go line by line through the budget, make sure that it's a thoughtful, conservative budget that prioritizes.
One of the things that people would know you for is a person who's been willing to defend the rainy day fund.
Sure.
Because the rainy day fund is for when you have a rainy day, or we did have an hurricane. But it seemed like every time I was turning around, I was reading about some of your colleagues that wanted to dip into that fund. Sure. And sometimes the lone voice, not always the lone voice, but sometimes it felt like you were the lone voice. You're in the back of the room there and the microphone having to say, the rainy day fund is for a rainy day. And so you're going to have the same problem, even worse, in Congress, but if you're elected. But you certainly had to fight for that, because if there's any money out there, there are a number of Democrats and some Republicans that are saying, oh, let's just go use that money.
Sure. Well, I think in Texas, we're certainly blessed to have had some people who had the forethought, in the 80s to set up a rainy day fund. They've been through some very hard fiscal times. They realized, we should have set some money aside when times were better. And so they took the severance tax revenue, which is revenue we get off of oil and gas, and they said, look, let's take not the base piece, but the top piece that fluctuates more, and let's take that and put it in a savings account. And so they've done that, and we now have about $10 billion in the rainy day fund, or the economic stabilization fund, as it is called in the state constitution.
Sure.
And the rainy day fund is actually the biggest single savings account in the country, and on a per capita basis. A lot of people say, why do you need that? And two basic reasons. One, for budgeting. You need that, and the comptroller tries to project out revenues for 30 months. It's very difficult to do. They're off usually 35%. So you need to have a savings account in case the revenue comes in a little lower than what you thought it was going to be, and you can tweak your budget accordingly. And then the second reason is the rating agencies, particularly Standard & Poor's, when they rate Texas. And look, we're in a AAA bond-rated state by all three rating agencies, and so things are good. But that's because of good decisions that were made over decades, not because of last week's election. The final thing I'll say on the rainy day fund is that it is heartening how many Texans care about the rainy day fund.
It is amazing,
and so it is. I think of myself as a spokesman for them. I'm not my own person all by myself. It is me talking on behalf of millions of Texans that want to make sure that Texas continues to have fiscal solvency, and that we have a good savings account, and that we have enough money to handle when there is a revenue shortfall.
Let me just mention that right now, of course, you represent the 8th District, which is Collin County. And if you're elected, you will represent the 3rd District, Congressional District. But they're very similar. They overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
And Collin County has done very well, in large part because it has had that sort of pro-growth, low kind of emphasis on regulations. True?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, so my perch, being the state senator for Collin County, has been a very, very eye-opening experience for me, because you talk about conservative policies, you talk about keeping taxes low, about keeping regulations reasonable, keeping lawsuits in check. And so when you look at those things and then you contrast it to blue states, we keep watching companies come from blue states, and they almost exclusively come from blue states.
I've noticed that.
And actually, they self-describe blue state refugees. I'm here trying to escape, the bad taxes, the traffic, the regulations, the litigation, because the state I'm in, the politicians are not investing in roads. They're raising taxes, going into debt, not funding pension funds. And they're causing problems that my business just doesn't want to deal with anymore. We're done. We're leaving this state, and that's a very draconian. That's a very very stark decision for a big business that owns its own buildings and has been there 50 years to say, you know what, we're up and leaving. We're moving everybody to Richardson, Texas, like State Farm did from Illinois, or we're moving everybody from Torrance, California, like Toyota did. And you see these huge companies coming to North Texas because they want a better future. And I think that they're committed, they tell me, to making sure that Texas continues to keep doing what it's doing, because we're doing it right in Texas.
Right.
And obviously there's an indictment by their movement to say, these blue states that are not building roads, that are going into debt, that are raising taxes, that are not funding their pension funds, they're doing it wrong.
Yes. And matter of fact, tomorrow on our Millennial Roundtable, we're going to talk about this one essay. It was in Time Magazine. The guy who was basically arguing, a lot of people wonder how this happened in America, and he's blaming everything from the First Amendment to even some conservatives for why we have infrastructures crumbling and why we have people fleeing various states.
Interesting.
I think you're missing something here, which is back to the Collin County experience compared to, or even the Texas experience compared to California.
Well, and just when you talk about infrastructure, I'll kind of give you a couple numbers to kind of flesh out that particular comment. So Texas has a 20-cent a gallon gas tax. California had a 42.5-cent a gallon state gas tax. They just increased it another 20 cents, so they're now well ahead. They're the most in the country by like 19 cents or something. And they have 12% of the U.S. population. Texas has 8% of the U.S. population. So they have 50% more people, 100% higher gas tax. Between 2002 and 2012, Texas built over 5,000 miles of state highway. In that same decade, California built 11 miles of state highway.
Yeah.
So clearly they were collecting tons of gas tax money. They were just not spending it on roads.
And again, I grew up in California. I was born in Berkeley.
Wow.
San Francisco Bay Area. And I remember some of the roads I was driving almost 50 years ago that have not been repaired since, which is an indictment. Need to take a break. We're going to talk about his congressional campaign and some of the issues that Van Taylor will address if indeed he becomes a member of Congress. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We often talk about worldviews, but do we know how they were formed through history? Professor Glenn Sunshine wrote a great book entitled Why You Think the Way You Do, the story of Western worldviews from Rome to home. It helps us see the influence of worldviews through history, and he defines a worldview as the framework you use to interpret the world and your place in it. He begins by discussing the worldview of Rome, and by the end of the book, we return to the same worldview. Western civilization is a product of ancient Roman civilization plus Christianity. Glenn Sunshine argues that once you remove Christianity, the modern world reverted back to Roman society and a recovery of the ancient pagan worldview. Like Rome, we value toleration as the supreme virtue. The Romans lived in an oversexed society. So was our society. Rome practiced abortion. So does our society. Rome was antinatal and made a deliberate attempt to prevent pregnancy. They focused on sexual enjoyment and did not want to bother with kids. In our modern world, birth rates in most of the Western democracies are plummeting. So how should Christians live in this world? Of course, we should live out a biblical worldview. Every generation is called to live faithfully to the gospel, and our generation is no exception. From history, we can see that the early church did live faithfully and transform the Roman world. Christians produced a totally new civilization, Western culture. By living faithfully before the watching world, we will increase our credibility and earn the respect from those around us by living in accordance with biblical principles. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Ben Taylor in studio with us. If you'd like to join us, I suspect you want to just sit back and listen, but you can give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, right now in the Texas Senate and running for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District. Just before we get into some of the congressional issues, we were talking about Collin County, but let's talk about Texas overall, and that's the issue of property tax. Absolutely. If there's one issue that has surfaced in some of the interviews I've done with various members of the Texas legislature, property tax still a big issue, an undone issue, right?
Yeah, no, that has definitely been a huge issue. So just to kind of put this in perspective, so Texas is a $1.6 trillion economy. Texans pay about $50 billion a year in sales tax and $52 billion a year in property tax. So just kind of put that in perspective. Of the property taxes, $27 billion is school tax and $25 billion is local taxes. So cities, counties, special purpose districts. Special purpose district is primarily the community colleges and hospital districts. That's 80% of it. So the local property taxes over the past decade, school taxes over the last decade have grown approximately 40%, as has the economy, as has median GDP, as has the state budget. The city county taxes have grown about 70% over the last decade, and special purpose districts have grown actually 100% over the last decade. So clearly that's unsustainable. And I think when you lay the numbers out, you cannot but come to the conclusion that local taxes are unsustainably growing. We cannot continue to grow them at the rate we're growing them without breaking the bank. Now, you might ask, why is that happening? And the answer is that appraisals are going up faster than income.
Yes, they are.
Appraisals are going up because interest rates have been low or going down. So as rates go down, appraisals go up. And whereas, sales tax grows approximately with the economy, and that's what's happened over the last decade and has happened for a long time, property taxes are not doing that. They're growing too fast. And so the legislature last session, I was put on a special select committee by the Lieutenant Governor called the Select Committee on Property Tax Reform and Relief. We went around the state of Texas. We had hearings all over, including a hearing in Arlington and a hearing in Plano, and listened to hundreds of taxpayers talk about their story and give their testimony. Tax hearings are usually pretty dry. Spreadsheet, calculator. These were very emotional. They were very raw. I mean, I remember a woman in Houston, Texas, who came and testified that her husband, who had died 20 years before, she lived in the home that he had built for her, and that the taxes had gotten to the point that she had put her home on the market for sale. Just a heartbreaking story, a story of a woman in Collin County who needed to fix her roof and paint her home, and said, I have the money for the repairs. I do not have the money for the taxes that go with it. I live in a dilapidated home, not because I can't afford to repair it, because I can't afford the taxes that go with repairing it. And listening to people on fixed incomes, particularly school teachers, talk about how the property taxes had gotten out of hand. They couldn't afford it anymore, and they were moving to Oklahoma. And that's just heartbreaking that someone who's from Texas, lived their whole life in Texas, worked in Texas schools on a fixed income, just can't afford the property taxes. So I think it's incumbent to come up with a property tax system that works for everybody, that grows on a sustainable basis. And that's not what we have today. We do not have a property tax system that works for everybody. We do not have a property tax system that grows on a sustainable basis. And the legislature, particularly the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor, are leading on this. They want to see a property tax system that slows the rate of growth so that it is sustainable, so that people can afford to pay it, just like they can afford to pay their sales tax.
Well, again, we'll watch that and probably be talking to some of your colleagues about that one, because you will be in Congress most likely. And let's talk about that for just a minute, because you've seen both the House and the Senate in Texas, and oftentimes say in Texas, a good legislation in the Senate goes to the House to die.
Right.
But you're now going to Congress, and good legislation in the House goes to the Senate to die.
Right.
And you have some numbers on that, which I thought was kind of intriguing, because when I say that, people wonder, well, what are the numbers? You've actually worked on some of those numbers, haven't you?
Yeah. So, and actually, I'll contrast. So the Texas legislature is a relatively functional bipartisan body. Literally every bill I've passed into law has gotten bipartisan support. And that may strike someone as unusual, but of the, I think, 1,150 bills that the governor signed into law last year, I believe only 6 had a partisan vote in the Texas Senate. So partisan bills are actually very much the exception rather than the rule in the Texas legislature. And so it's not unusual for someone to say, yeah, and all the bills I ever passed, everyone got, I had bipartisan support. That's normal. That's the standard. It's unusual for someone to say, I have a bill that only Republicans supported or only Democrats supported. In the U.S. Congress, on the other hand, in the U.S. House, I think the U.S. House passed about 550 bills to the Senate, and only about 60 this is last year, and only 60 of those bills got to the president's desk. So it is highly unusual. 90% of the bills that the U.S. House passes go to the Senate and die and never ever get to the president's desk. Yeah. So it's a very hard, very complicated system. There are many more steps to it. It's much more complicated in how things are done, and unfortunately, things get very politicized there and become partisan quickly, which is unfortunate.
In Congress have a Freedom Caucus, and it seems to me, and of course, you've had this in the legislature too. Sure. And we've had talked to Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan. Of course, we've had Louis Gohmert in studio many times like that, and I mentioned all sorts of other names. It does seem to me that those are the people that are saying, we really need some fiscal conservatives up here, and so maybe they're looking forward to having you join them in one way or another, if not officially, certainly unofficially, because I think your votes are going to be standing up for that.
Sure. No, I'm definitely a fiscal conservative in my core. I believe, government taxes too much, it spends too much. My first act running for the Texas House was signing the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, promising to vote against and oppose any effort to increase taxes. My first act running for the state Senate was sign the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. My first act running for Congress was to sign the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. And not only have I signed the pledge, but you've actually seen me live that out. You see me vote against and oppose tax increases, and I've been maligned for it. So I'm certainly willing to take the lumps with doing what's right. But that comes from a deep belief in working for the people that send me to go serve them.
I've got a link here to vantaylor.com, and if people want to know more about you, want to be part of your campaign, write you a letter, ask you a question, that's one of the ways they can connect with you, can't they?
Absolutely. vantaylor.com is definitely a way to do that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'll just say this, for the people that I serve in the 8th Senatorial District, I have always had a 100% meeting policy. Every constituent who has ever asked to have a meeting with me, whether I've met you or just doesn't matter who you are. If I represent you, I meet with you. And let me just say that is, first, it's important to stay in touch with the people and to listen to what they think and what's important to them. And secondly, let me say my best ideas legislatively come from the people that I work for. And some really great legislative ideas have come out of just meetings with people who I'd never met before, and they sat down and said, I've got a problem, and how can you fix it? And, we've gotten some good things done for Texas by doing that.
Again, you've been in the 8th Senatorial District, and they had a very expensive campaign last time. Was it $10 million? We had Angela Paxton in here the other day. Of course, Phil Hines has been with us as well. I don't think you're going to spend that kind of money even running for Congress, are you? What do you think? What does it look like in terms of a campaign, a congressional campaign? I have no idea anymore.
Well, we're going to run a full campaign, and I'm out every day talking to voters, and continuing my 100% meeting policy as part of that, and going to events, and I'm going to work hard to represent all the people of the 3rd Congressional District, because every single one of them deserves a good representative. I really appreciate the maturity that so many of my voters have in understanding that I can only take one vote. I can vote yes or no on a particular piece of legislation, and that I'm trying to represent everybody, and that sometimes their views are in the minority, and that unfortunately they don't, the way that they would prefer that I vote. I'm not going to be able to do that because there's only one of me, and I can only cast one vote.
And again, you'll probably have offices here in Washington and a number of places. And again, primarily, we were talking to people that are in Collin County. But give us a sense of where the district is exactly.
Sure. So the third congressional district is within Collin County. The cities of Plano, Frisco, Allen, McKinney, and then also the cities within Collin County of Richardson and Dallas. And then there's Prosper and a couple other smaller cities in eastern Collin County that are in the 3rd congressional district.
Well, again, we have information about vantaylor.com. There's a place where you can meet him, some of the issues, news, volunteer, contribute to all of those kinds of things. You'd welcome any kind of participation, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. No. And I am a better legislator for every time someone picks up the phone. And, actually, let me say this. Over the last 3 years as a state senator, I've had over 1,000 separate constituent meetings. And that is more than one every single business day. And people are like, wow, Van, that's incredible work ethic. And I say, what's really impressive is how many of my voters care enough to sit down and tell me what they think about it. So I feel very blessed to represent a district that is engaged, that will show up, that will take the time to meet with me, to offer their thoughts and ideas, and sometimes just to say, look, I've got a problem, I'm not sure how to solve it, and sometimes we're able to solve it, which is really exciting.
Well, again, I've got a Van Taylor sign in my yard. And again, if you want to put one in your yard, you're welcome to do so. And so thank you. That's the busy day that you've had to come by and spend a little bit of time with us here at Point of View. So look forward to the next opportunity.
All right, sure. Good to be with you.
You will find out tonight who your opponent will be. So
yes, I will.
Got to run out. So we're going to take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Sarita is a Point of View listener in Georgia, someone probably a lot like you. Listening to your program, she writes, has helped me realize that I do have the power to conduct change in my area and this nation. And with all of the online tools you provide, this power has become even more apparent to me. What can one person do? A whole lot, says Sarita. And then she says, and together we can get even more done. She's right. Sarita is right. This is a moment of opportunity, and together with you, Point of View is looking to accomplish a lot. This program and those online tools she mentioned will only continue being available if we hear from people like you this week. Join Truth Team 360. There are many levels. Check them out. Choose the size of the part you can play at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Got a question for you. Should we ever refer to humans as animals? Of course, the president brought that up when he referred to a particular violent and virulent group as animals. And of course, the mainstream media suggested he was calling all illegal aliens, animals. And of course, that's not the case. But is it ever even appropriate to say that someone is inhumane or is acting beastly? And I thought about that and thought, well, we'll just ignore it until Dennis Prager wrote a piece. And I just thought I would read it for just a few minutes because he actually helps us understand that sometimes even when you are dealing with people that have engaged in the most extreme kind of behavior, it is oftentimes difficult for at least some on the left to actually condemn it. Words like evil or inhumane or debauched or depraved or animals or something like that are just sometimes never allowed. And I thought it was interesting to see how Dennis Prager addressed it. And if you want to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. He says, if you want to understand the moral sickness at the heart of leftism, read the first paragraph of the most recent column, The Washington Post columnist by E.J. Dionne. E.J. Dionne, who writes for the Washington Post, individual we've quoted here from time to time, said it's never right to call other human beings animals. It's not something we should even have to debate. No matter how debased the behavior of a given group or of individuals is, no matter how much the legitimate the anger that genuinely evil actions might inspire, dehumanizing others leads us down a dangerous path. So again, Dennis Prager wants to kind of critique it a little bit. Do a little exegesis. He says, let's begin with the first sentence. It's never right to call other human beings animals. And he says this is so evident to Dionne that he adds, it's not something we should even have to debate. And Dennis Prager responds by saying, only someone who has never debated the issue could make such a claim. So allow me to debate the assertion. My view is the antithesis of Dionne's. As I see it, it is not right to never call another human being an animal. He's using a double negative here, but the point he's making is this. Calling the cruelest among us names such as animal or any other dehumanizing epithet actually protects humans. He says the word beastly exists for a reason and is frequently applied to human beings. By rhetorically reading certain despicable people out of the human race, we elevate the human race. We have declared certain behaviors out of line with being human. Now, again, as a Christian, I look at this a little different than Dennis Prager. I say, okay, all have value and dignity because all are created in the image of God. So certainly I recognize that everyone has value. But when individuals engage in the most despicable, dehumanizing, again, animalistic, beastly kind of behavior, I think its behavior deserves to be called out. Now, Dennis Prager goes back and tries to explain this a little bit. He says, biologically, of course, we're all humans. But if human is to mean anything moral, anything beyond the purely biological, then some people who have committed particularly heinous acts of evil against other human beings are not to be considered human. Otherwise, human has no moral being. We should then not retain the word inhumane. That's another way. You think about the words we use to say that you're not acting like a responsible human being. I've mentioned beastly. We talked about the despicable. We use the word dehumanizing, inhumane. Just think about all the words that we use to say you're not acting like a moral human being. Anyway, let's go back to Dennis Prager's commentary. He say, what is the difference between he is inhumane and he is an animal? Both imply actions that render a person no longer human. Dionne provides his answer at the end of the paragraph. Dehumanizing others leads us down a dangerous path. He provides not a single argument or illustration of this truly absurd comment. I think what maybe E.J. Dionne was thinking about is when we say that a certain group of individuals, just because of who they are, not what they do, are inhumane. That has been used, for example, even by Nazi Germany, has been used by almost every group to dehumanize individuals. Look at the dehumanizing of individuals that takes place during the war, especially World War II. I mean, the negative things that were said about Germans, the negative things that were said about Japanese, because they were our enemies. And in some respects, you almost mentally have to get over the fact that you're killing another fellow human being. So sometimes I see what he's talking about. But if nothing else, Dennis Prager then talks about how anyone who refuses to dehumanize the Nazi physicians
who with no anesthesia froze naked people for hours, then dropped them in boiling water to rewarm them, put people in depressurized rooms when their eardrums burst, driving them out of their minds from pain, rubbed wood shavings and ground glass into infected wounds, and all sorts of other things I won't get into. But he says, to put that very gently, those are people that are profoundly confused. So he said, what would Dion have us call those Nazi physicians? Not nice? Badly flawed? Evil? Well, you can't use that word anymore, at least in the politically correct world. You can't even use words like evil because it assumes there's a moral standard. And who are you to say that something's good or bad, right or wrong, because we're not allowed to make those decisions anymore. And so again, Dennis Prager says, why is rhetorically ostracizing them from the human race a dangerous path? He doesn't have an answer because he lives in the world of moral-sounding platitudes. Leftism consists almost entirely of morally sounding platitudes, statements meant to make the person making them feel morally sophisticated, but based on their relative reactions to the sadist of the MS-13 gangs. He says, I trust Donald Trump's moral compass more than E.J. Dion's. Dennis Prager goes on to say, it is ever dangerous to use dehumanizing rhetoric on people, of course, when it is directed at people based on their race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, or any other immutable physical characteristics. If I'd written the column, I would have put that early on to eliminate somebody reading through thinking, well, isn't it wrong to sometimes dehumanize an entire race? I would have used that early on just to make the case, but nevertheless, you know, Dennis Prager can write the way he wants to. Then he goes on to say the Nazis did what they did to Jews and others because they dehumanized them based on their religious, ethnic, and racial identity. That's why racism is evil. But why is it dangerous to use such rhetoric on people based on their behavior? By equating the label of the cruelest among us, animals, with labeling Jews animals, Dion cheapens the fight against real evil. And he ends with a very powerful statement. Dennis Prager said that he once asked a rabbi, Leon Radzik, who was a Holocaust survivor who had been in Auschwitz, what word he would use to characterize these sadistic guards in the camp, the Auschwitz camp. And Dennis Prager says, I'll never forget his response. He said they were monsters with a human face. Monsters with a human face. So, nevertheless, a lot of debate right now about whether we could ever refer to individuals who have animalistic behavior as animals. We'll leave that to another day. It's not the words I use, but certainly somewhere along the line we need to come up with words like evil, debased, inhuman, beastly, decadent, something that would actually give us a word that says that these evil, despicable people should not be considered a prime example of human beings. But anyway, that is one of those debates that has been taking place for some time. And let me just mention that last week I guess it was just yesterday, I should say, had the commentary that came out on educational fraud. And certainly as we've spent some time this first hour here talking with Van Taylor, I think one of the big issues that's going to surface pretty quickly in these campaigns has to do with the subject of education. Notice he was pointing out the fact that the amount of money we're spending in education in the state of Texas is increasing dramatically. It's not because we have more students. It's not because increasing the spending is increasing the academic performance. It's just that that money is going and not making an impact. And my commentary yesterday, if you haven't had a chance to get it, is based upon what is called the nation's report card. It's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And the sad reality in my commentary was that about a third of the nation's 12th graders, these are the ones just about ready to graduate, tested proficiently or better in reading. Only a third. And only 1/4 were proficient in math. But let's recognize that as we're in this graduation ceremony, some of your 12th graders have already graduated, others are about ready to graduate. The national high school graduation rate is 80%, which means that about 2/3 of these individuals walking down these aisles, getting these diplomas, cannot read at the 12th grade level, and about 3/4 of them cannot compute at the 12th grade level. So this is kind of what I called it educational fraud. We're handing them a diploma which doesn't mean a great deal. And then in my commentary, I go on, and I'll cover a little bit after the break. We're also handing them not only high school diplomas, but a very significant number of them are going on to college. And colleges are giving them an admission, once again, to suggest that they're college ready. And they're not. So think about this when you sit in a high school graduation. Maybe we're in the midst of an educational fraud. I'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me talk about education for a little bit longer. We'll talk about educational fraud, and then I want to get to this case in one of the Fort Worth school districts here where they have a health textbook, which on the front says abstinence, puberty, and personal health. So it'd say, oh, that's good. They're teaching abstinence. Not really. They're teaching transgender issues. And as one father said, I love the line, my child can bring his math book home, and I can see what's in there, but my child can't bring the health book home. That tells you something right there. So we're going to get into that whole issue of sex education in a minute, but let me finish my point on the educational fraud. My piece yesterday, if you'd like to get a copy of it, called Educational Fraud, May 21st. And as I pointed out, that when we look at this, only a third of the nation's 12th graders tested proficiently or better in reading, and only a fourth tested proficiently or better in math. Now, Dr. Walter Williams is somebody that we also have a link to because he's African-American. He's, by the way, an economist at George Mason University, also looks at the black issues, and that's even worse. For black students, 17% proficient in reading, 7% proficient in math. So it goes from bad to worse when you start working down to other particular social groups, Hispanic American, African American, whatever that might be. But here's the educational fraud. Number one, a lot of these kids, with an 80% graduation rate, you can do the math and figure out, well, assuming you can do the math and you have some proficiency, you can figure out that what we are doing is about 2/3 of the individuals that are going to be walking across the stages around the country, some in Texas, others in other particular states, cannot read at the 12th grade level. And 3/4 of them possibly cannot then also actually do math at the 12th grade level. And so that's the first fraud. But the fraud continues because then we recognize that about 70% of white high school graduates are enrolled in college, and about 58%, almost 60%, so it's a little bit of a drop-off, but not a whole lot, of black high school students are also enrolled in college, and that's where the educational fraud is perpetuated, because these students, by definition, are not college ready. So what do they have to do? Well, either we enroll them in all sorts of remedial courses because they weren't prepared in high school, or we allow them to just enroll in normal college-educated courses, and either they flunk out, or you have something that I've written about in the past, grade inflation, where professors are told by the administration, you can only flunk out a small percentage of those, so you're going to have to give passing grades to individuals that in previous decades you would never give a passing grade to. And you can begin to see the problem. So that's the issue of educational fraud. But I thought, especially since it's the news right now, this transgender lesson in a health class in Fort Worth, there's going to be some interesting comments tonight in that particular open meeting. It brings us back to, again, what is happening in this whole area of sex education. Because what happened when President Obama came into office, he waited a couple of years, but by 2010, when you actually had the passage of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's called, it eliminated all the funding to what was called sexual risk avoidance education, which essentially was abstinence education, and instead created what was called teen pregnancy prevention programs. And so that was something which then began to teach comprehensive sex education. It teaches more than just, the birds and the bees, the sexual aspects. It also, of course, teaches about homosexuality. That's where you have this little booklet that says abstinence, puberty, and personal health. And you'd say, okay, it's teaching abstinence. But it also has all sorts of stuff about transgenderism in there, because after all, the various liberal bureaucrats at the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as at a variety of other places, including the Texas particular curriculum as well, want to include all of that in there. And as I've pointed out before, what you end up with is something that actually does more harm than good. Don't take it from me. When President Obama's Department of Health and Human Services, not the individuals that are currently in there under Donald Trump, but when his people were in there, what you found was that they actually did an evaluation of the comprehensive sex education program and concluded that more than 80% of the teens in the program fared either worse or no better than their peers who were not part of the program. So if nothing else, his own evaluation was this isn't working very well. So as we look at, we can begin to see that there were some real problems with the current program that was implemented 8 years ago in 2010. So that's why new individuals that have come into the Department of Health and Human Services under Donald Trump have said, maybe it's time to go back and find something that works, because after all, abstinence programs did reduce pregnancy and STDs, and we could begin to teach those once again. And at the same time, the current sex education programs that were implemented, the so-called teen pregnancy prevention programs, actually weren't effective, or in some cases were actually worse. And so this is why I think we're going to have to pay more and more attention to what is taught in the classrooms. And as a parent, I want to give you just a very significant warning. if your child is being educated about health and sexuality in the classroom, and they're not allowed to bring their workbook or textbook home, that should be an indication that maybe what is being taught is something that you would have some concerns about. So again, this is why there is going to be this ongoing debate about what was taught in a health class the other day, and that's why I think we are going to have to continue to pay attention to it in the future. By the way, even when they teach abstinence, they also teach about condoms, because the argument is, well, we'll say that abstinence works because, after all, if you abstain from sex, you're not going to get pregnant, you're not going to get someone else pregnant, and you're not going to get an STD. But given the fact that most of you probably are not going to follow the abstinence message, we need to teach you about condoms. And, of course, one of the arguments that has been used time and time again is they point to a couple of studies, and there are a handful of those, that actually have shown that condoms can be effective in preventing the spread of STDs. But as I've pointed out on this program before, and I point out in the column, the words that are used in every one of those studies is that these condoms must be used consistently and correctly. And as I ask in the commentary, if you have teenagers at home, would you use the words consistently and correctly to describe a teenager's behavior? I didn't think so. So this is why there is always this kind of fallback position. And in the midst of not only teaching about sex education, oftentimes they're teaching about alternative lifestyles, about homosexuality, about transgenderism. And so maybe that's why you're seeing so many stories surfacing over the last couple of days about this transgender lesson that was taught in a health class there in the Fort Worth School District. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to change topics once again. Gordon Robertson is with us, and he is the CEO of the Christian Broadcasting Network. We're going to talk about a couple of issues. First of all, he has some thoughts about the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But they also have this new film that has come out as well that is entitled How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. Fascinating piece. So we're going to spend some time talking with him and, of course, also give you a chance to join the conversation as we begin to deal with some of those issues. In the third hour, if you'd like to join us online, certainly we do not broadcast the local station that hour. We'll have Lathan Watts in. We'll be talking about some issues related to religious liberty, as well as some very wise words for high school graduates. So we need to take a break. If you'd like to know more, visit our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, well, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary. because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Let me just first of all say thank you to those who were stepping in for me for a few days while I was out of country. On Friday, we had Colonel Alan West, and oh, what a great job he did. And then yesterday, we had Dr. Merrill Matthews. But I'm back and certainly looking forward to the next 2 hours. We have, first of all, some great material that comes from our good friends at Christian Broadcasting Network. We're going to be talking with Gordon Robertson. A little bit later, we'll have in studio Lathan Watts, and we'll talk about some of the material he's been writing on things related to religious liberty. Has a great kind of graduation message and much more that we will talk about then. Gordon Robertson is certainly an individual that I'm sure you're well aware of. He's been on the program with us before. Of course, you see him on CBN, is the Chief Executive Officer of CBN, an individual graduated from Yale University, also has a Juris Doctoral degree from Washington and Lee University, has been involved, of course, in the ongoing activities there at CBN. Wanted to spend some time talking about, first of all, the movement of the embassy in Washington, D.C., from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the American embassy, of course, and then just a wonderful resource that I think you're going to appreciate, 5-part miniseries, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. So a lot to talk about. And if you'd like to join us, of course, the phones are open, 1-800-351-1212. Gordon Robertson, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
It's great to be with you, Kerby.
One of the things we've done is also posted an article that Nancy Flory did with you on why the U.S. Embassy moved to Jerusalem matters. So as we go through this, if individuals want some facts and figures or some quotes, that's available on our website, pointofview.net. But talk about this, a historic day in which not only talking about the 70th anniversary of the founding of the nation of Israel, but also a move of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Why does that matter?
Well, it does matter from an international standpoint, just basic international law. Israel is a sovereign nation. All sovereign nations get to designate their capital. Israel is unique, though, as a sovereign nation, and the capital it's designated, Jerusalem, has not been recognized by the other nations of the world. So I'm proud of the United States for finally saying, yes, Israel, as a sovereign nation, has the right to designate its own capital. And from my point of view, it's a long time coming, but it's finally here. So it's a great day to celebrate. The Congress recognized it back in 1995 with the Embassy Relocation Act, and every administration since that law was signed by President Clinton in 1995 has sort of kicked the can down the road, citing security concerns as the reason they didn't move the embassy. But here we are, and it's appropriate on the 70th anniversary of the rebirth of the modern state of Israel to finally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Well, and again, the significance of that, as you said, 1995, you had a candidate running for re-election, Bill Clinton, saying that he was going to move it, did not. You have candidate George W. Bush saying he was going to move the embassy and did not. You had a candidate Barack Obama saying that he was going to move it and did not. And then you even had candidate Donald Trump, and after a year said, you know, I said this, so I'm going to do so. And that, I think, is significant. If for no other reason, then it's about time to see some of these politicians actually make a statement and then fulfill it. And so that is significant. But as Christians, for a minute, let's talk about the Christian significance, because from a Christian standpoint, it really is kind of a fulfillment of prophecy, isn't it?
It is a fulfillment of prophecy. You look at Micah chapter 4, you look at Isaiah chapter 60. Both talk about the nations of the world coming to Zion. And Zion is another word for Jerusalem. So the nations will come to the glory of Zion. And so the U.S. is the first one to move the embassy, and now we're going to see Guatemala's done it, Paraguay's done it. So hopefully the other nations will join in, and they'll recognize what I think should be recognized under international law. Israel has a right to declare its capital, and the other nations need to respect that.
Well, again, it's one of those interesting footnotes, because every other nation has been allowed to designate where its capital would be, but the one exception was Israel. But also in the article we've posted here, you have a little point that most people don't realize, that the United States has had a consulate in Jerusalem since the 1850s. So in some respects, we have recognized, even before there was a formal nation of Israel, we've certainly seen the significance of that area of the world, haven't we?
That's a piece of American history people don't know, but the consulate goes all the way back to the 1850s, before the Civil War. And rather unique and colorful history of that consulate. And the first consul was a Quaker from Pennsylvania, who then became an Orthodox Jew. He converted to Judaism in Jerusalem. That consulate is actually where the new embassy is going to be. There was an annex created to the consulate roughly 10 years ago, and it's a big building, and all you have to do is just change the nameplate on it and add some security precautions for the ambassador's office, and you're good to go. And the Trump administration recognized all of that. When they first talked about moving, one of the objections was, you're going to spend a couple of $1 billion constructing a new building, and you've got to have all this elaborate security. And the point, and anyone who's been to Jerusalem knows there's a U.S. consulate there.
Yes, there is.
And it's an easy thing to do. And take the consular activities that were happening in Jerusalem, move them to Tel Aviv, and take the ambassador and move him to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and again, anybody that's traveled, and of course you've been there and I have, and we've taken some of our point of view listeners, and I know you have as well, that you don't realize until you get there that it doesn't make a lot of sense, since all of the activities are in Jerusalem, whether it is the legislative, judicial, executive branches that are there, the Knesset and all of that. And if you're in Tel Aviv, you have to go up to Jerusalem and then come back again. We had a consulate there, as you point out, and you could literally just change the nameplates. Of course, they've done a lot more than that. And there's a joke that you talk about in this piece that we've posted as well, that they used to say in Tel Aviv, you need a passport to go to Jerusalem, which illustrates, again, kind of the differences that many people have between whether or not Jerusalem should be part of Israel or whether it should be part of some kind of Palestinian state.
Well, I think that's the reason that many administrations did not move the embassy. It was sort of this elusive peace process, that somehow the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel would somehow derail the peace process. My point on that is the peace process has never been on any kind of rail. I don't think the Palestinians have ever really been serious about coming to peace with Israel. And you look at that history, and literally going back to the 1920s under the British Mandate, and what the League of Nations was trying to do and establish a Jewish state in the land of Palestine, the Arabs did not want it. And 70 years ago, when Israel declared independence, well, the Arab nations surrounding Israel declared war. They did that the midnight of Independence Day.
We'll take a break, continue our conversation with Gordon Robertson right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We often talk about worldviews, but do we know how they were formed through history? Professor Glenn Sunshine wrote a great book entitled Why You Think the Way You Do, the story of Western worldviews from Rome to home. It helps us see the influence of worldviews through history, and he defines a worldview as the framework you use to interpret the world and your place in it. He begins by discussing the worldview of Rome, and by the end of the book, we return to the same worldview. Western civilization is a product of ancient Roman civilization plus Christianity. Glenn Sunshine argues that once you remove Christianity, the modern world reverted back to Roman society and a recovery of the ancient pagan worldview. Like Rome, we value toleration as the supreme virtue. The Romans lived in an oversexed society. So was our society. Rome practiced abortion. So does our society. Rome was antinatal and made a deliberate attempt to prevent pregnancy. They focused on sexual enjoyment and did not want to bother with kids. In our modern world, birth rates in most of the Western democracies are plummeting. So how should Christians live in this world? Of course, we should live out a biblical worldview. Every generation is called to live faithfully to the gospel, and our generation is no exception. From history, we can see that the early church did live faithfully and transformed the Roman world. Christians produced a totally new civilization, Western culture. By living faithfully before the watching world, we will increase our credibility and earn the respect from those around us by living in accordance with biblical principles. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gordon Robertson with us today, and we're talking for just a few more minutes about the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Then I want to get into this five-part mini-series, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. Also, we'll get into a little bit of the boycott, disinvestment, sanctions issue, and a couple other things related to Israel. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Do you believe we should support the nation of Israel? Do you support the move of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? Love to get your comments today, as we're privileged to talk with Gordon Robertson, Chief Executive Officer of CBN. What about the movement of the embassy? My argument is that there have been people that said we shouldn't have moved the embassy because it created all sorts of turmoil there. I got the sense that on the 70th anniversary and the beginning of Ramadan, you were going to have the conflicts in Gaza and even in Syria and other places actually taking place anyway. I don't think the embassy was anything other than a late excuse to that. But what about this move and the argument that is made so often that this has, as you said, derailed the peace process and actually inflamed passions against Israel? Any thoughts?
Well, that was the fear, I think, of previous administrations, that if the embassy were to move, it would just inflame the region. And that's been a fear. The fear of the Arab street was the phrase, and it literally goes back to the 1920s. What is the Arab street going to do with this kind of news, and is it going to spark riots and civil unrest? And there was a lot of expectation of that. Certainly in in Gaza and in the West Bank, you have Hamas agitating and doing very forceful protests, trying to cross into Israel and break through the fencing there. Certainly, Iran launched a provocation against Israel and launched missiles against Israel, and then you see an outbreak of direct conflict between Israel and Iran, which is a first. So these things, I don't think they're accidental. I think they were absolutely planned. But the huge uprising that I think was feared did not materialize. And we're not seeing, Hamas was saying that 100,000 Palestinians are going to try to march on Israel. That did not happen. We're not seeing unrest in the streets of Cairo or in Jordan. It's just not happening there. So from my point of view, it was a lot of bluff. So the underlying issue, though, is not about did it derail the peace process, because, again, I don't think the peace process there was ever any real hope of peace. And all you have to do is look back on Bill Clinton's biography, where he talks about the peace process during his administration and how he was absolutely amazed what Israel put on the table, and then equally amazed that Yasser Arafat turned it down.
Yes.
And it just, I think that point in history needs to be underlined for everyone in the current debate, that there is no possibility of peace from a Palestinian perspective. They do not intend to create a state and haven't for decades. Back in the 1920s, 1930s, Israel was very concerned about nation building and was putting together the structures necessary to have a viable economy, a viable school system, healthcare system, agriculture, all the things that you need for a thriving modern culture. The Palestinians were never about that, and it was always about warfare and always about let's drive Israel into the sea. Yasser Arafat, in turning down that peace offer, knew that if he had accepted it, he was taking his own life. And that should be underscored as well. Anwar Sadat was very publicly assassinated by the Muslim Brotherhood in a grandstand event. It was a public execution, and the reason for his execution, he signed a peace deal with Israel. He recognized Israel's right to exist, and he said that Egypt would no longer be at war with Israel. Back in 1948, there was an attempt by the King of Jordan to come to peace with Israel, and again, he was publicly executed at the Temple Mount as he was going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in front of his son, and he was executed because he dared to say, let us come to peace with Israel. So unless we first address that ideology, the ideology we need to drive Israel into the sea, that Palestinian foment that is generational. This isn't something that is new. It has been going on for decades and is instructed in the school systems there, is preached in the mosques. They celebrate terrorism. They build monuments to their terrorists. There's a city square in Ramallah that is dedicated to the man who invented the suicide vest and loaded that vest with ball bearings in order to kill more people. He is celebrated. The refrigerator bomber has a statue in that square, and his claim to fame is he packed a refrigerator full of explosives, took it to Zion Square in Israel, in Jerusalem, and blew it up and killed innocent people. Even the recent knife attacks, they named streets after what they call the Shaheed, the martyrs. We call them terrorists, and they glorify this. And until that fundamental ideology is really addressed and dealt with, that this is truly evil, I don't think you're ever going to see peace. It's not about moving embassies. It's not about occupation. It's not about an apartheid state. It's not about any of those things. It's about a fundamental hatred of the Jewish people and a desire to drive Israel into the sea.
Again, just an understanding of who we are dealing with and what Israel is dealing with over there. Just excellent summary. Let me take a phone call before we take a break here, and then we'll get into this wonderful mini-series, To Life, How Israel Volunteers Are Changing the World. So first we'll go to South Carolina. Peggy, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Mr. Kerby.
What would you like to add to our conversation today?
I was going to contribute because I get the Beaufort Gazette every day here at home, and there was an article in it that was interesting saying, what does the Bible have to say about U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem?
Mm-hmm.
And it was going and talking about Hamas, and then it went to the book of Ezra. And it went on saying, in the Bible, there's another moment when a world leader recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish people. And it's in the book of Ezra, which is King Cyrus of Persia. And it goes on where he talks about, chapter 1 describes another historic moment when the Jewish were allowed to return to Jerusalem and resettle their homeland after being 70 years in exile. And the Babylonians, under the leadership of their king Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed Jerusalem and took Judea's population and leadership into exile. Yet the Persians defeated the Babylonians decades later, and thanks to Cyrus, 538 BCE, the Persian king ultimately brought the Jewish people back to the Holy Land, which would be Jerusalem.
Let me, just before I run out of time in this segment here, maybe get your comments. Because Gordon Robertson, if nothing else, it is interesting that in history we've recognized, and other kings and other countries have recognized, that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Why can't we recognize this now in the 21st century?
Well, I heard an interesting comment from an Israeli, and he actually corrected someone who said, well, Trump has finally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he said, well, he's 3,000 years late. God recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in the time of David, and he chose to put his name there and chose Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And all we're doing is recognizing what God has already done.
Yeah, great line. Need to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about this mini-series, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. I suspect a lot of you are not aware of all the good work that Israel has been doing in the world, and so this is one of the reasons that the Christian Broadcasting Network has put together this particular series, so we wanted you to know more about it. We have a trailer about that, so even as we go to the break, you can watch that and understand a little bit more about some of the resources that are available through CBN. So let's, if we can, encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you can find some information about Gordon Robertson. And, of course, we also have a link to lifethemovie.com. And, again, it's all available on our website. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, and we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Be back right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Gordon Robertson with CBN. And I might just mention some of the other DVDs that are also available. As a matter of fact, there's a 3-film DVD bundle, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Last time we had Gordon Robertson on, we were talking about the film In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. Just very well done and helps you understand the loss of life and some of the very important aspects of taking the country and especially the capital of Jerusalem. Then also one called The Hope, which is the rebirth of Israel. But we want to focus some time and attention on the newest one, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. And Gordon, I'd have to say that even though I've followed Israel, I've traveled to Israel, I've read about Israel, there's a lot in that new film that you've put together that I did not know about the Jewish tradition of repairing the world. Tell us about how you came to put together that particular film.
Well, Kerby, the idea started literally 5 years ago when we had done Made in Israel, which talked about all the innovation coming out of Israel. And I wanted to do a story on all the wonderful humanitarian work Israel does, because I think it's an untold story. I think most people don't know this.
Yes.
Here's a tiny nation, size of New Jersey, and since 1980, they've done humanitarian work in over 140 countries around the world. They're punching way above their weight class, both in terms of population, in terms of gross domestic product, the amount of humanitarian aid they do. And it's all fueled by this concept of Tikkun Olam. And going into the film, I thought I was going to hear a lot about that. And that roughly translates from the Hebrew to English as repairing the world, that our job before God is to repair the world. The world is fallen, and we need to go back out and fix it one life at a time. There's a phrase from the Talmud, he who saves one life is as if he saved the entire world. And I was expecting to hear a lot about that as we're filming this series. It's taken us 3 years to produce it. We had video teams that were embedded with humanitarian teams going out in multiple nations. We wanted to catch it from a reality point of view, so you are there as the disaster is unfolding and as the humanitarian work is unfolding. What's amazed me, and it absolutely amazed me, is to not hear Tikkun Olam. That was there, and that was sort of a subtext, but what I heard again and again and again is the reason we are doing this as Israelis, we need to be a light to the nations.
Wow.
And what they're quoting from is the book of Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 49, chapter 49, verse 6. And, you know, you get into the theology of this, and it's one where the rabbis and the Christian theologians both agree. This entire chapter can be viewed as pertaining specifically to the prophet Isaiah, and that is true. We still read the book of Isaiah today. It can also be interpreted as the Messiah, and both Christians and Jews agree, yes, this is about the Messiah. But they also agree it's about the state of Israel. And when Israel is restored to the land and becomes a nation again, God says, I will make you a light to the nations for the salvation of the world. So here we are with video teams in places like Africa, an island in Greece, Nepal earthquake, and again, the volunteers are saying, the reason we're here, the reason we do this, is we are supposed to be a light to the nations. Curiously, they were saying that regardless of their personal religious beliefs, so whether they were secular Jews or observant Jews or Christian Israelis. There's a wonderful quote from an Arab Christian Israeli. She's on an island in Greece doing humanitarian work for Syrian refugees who are coming ashore, and she says, I'm a minority within a minority, but I'm Israeli.
Yes.
And I want to be here because we're making history. And this whole concept, we're making history, we're being a light to the nations, we're being an example for others to follow. It just rang a bell with me, and it got me looking in a mirror at American culture and at myself. Why do we do what we do? And I can easily see an American Christian saying, well, the reason I'm doing humanitarian work is because I'm a Christian. I'm supposed to love other people. But I found it difficult to hear, well, I'm doing this because I'm an American. And when's the last time you heard an American say, America is supposed to be a city on a hill. America is supposed to be an example to other nations of what can happen when a people are free, when they have freedom of religion, freedom of press, a democracy, everyone participating. And I wonder, have we lost that as a culture? So for me, one of the things coming out of doing this documentary is I really want to get people here in America thinking, have we lost something fundamental to the whole concept of America? That are we ashamed of our culture now, or do we still hold on to those core beliefs? Do we still think of ourselves as an example? And to the extent we don't, can we look at Israel and say, well, if Israel, tiny Israel, can be a light to the nations, what can America do? And how can we imitate what they are doing around the world?
Well said. Light to the nations, of course, a city set on a hill. Ronald Reagan used to say that. It goes all the way back to the 17th century. And let me just mention that we have a way in which you can watch the world premiere. It takes about an hour and a half. Or, of course, we also have a link to the trailer, which is just a minute long. You might want to put it on your Facebook page or send it to someone and tell them more about that. And, again, we have a link to lifethemovie.com. You don't have to remember all that because we have links at our website, pointofview.net. Of course, they have them at CBN as well. And maybe for just a minute, obviously Israelis want to be a light to the world, but we also know, Gordon, tremendous anti-Semitism. So talk about how some of these Israeli volunteers have been received in these foreign countries, because sometimes there's a bias against Israel, but when they go to provide aid and comfort, it seems like that actually drops some of those barriers, doesn't it?
It absolutely changes the whole conversation and perception. And in the movie, one of the more stirring moments is an Arab man who's well into his 60s, and he's crying on the beach. He's a Syrian refugee. He's left his homeland because of the war. He literally has nothing. And when he finds out it's Israelis who are now helping him in his moment of need, he's reduced to tears. Mm-hmm. It changes everything. When you here you have a group that's been persecuted for centuries and persecuted the regular drumbeat of condemnation of Israel that comes out of the United Nations, the anti-Semitism that is unfortunately rising again in Europe, what they deal with on a regular basis from the Palestinians, from the Syrians, from the Jordanians, it's become routine. But in the middle of that, they say, no, our call is to be a light to the nations. We're not going to return evil with evil. We're going to return evil with good. We're going to go out and help people. It's absolutely stirring to see it in action. And as they're delivering that aid, whether it's in Nepal, or in the Philippines, or in Haiti, or to a Palestinian child in a hospital receiving free heart surgery in an Israeli hospital, it absolutely changes the entire perception and it changes the equation. And it's wonderful to see.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and continue our conversation for another couple minutes with Gordon Robertson. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me again encourage you to do a couple of things. First of all, you can actually watch the world premiere. We have a link there to Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. You might want to take the trailer, which we have a link to as well, and put it on your Facebook page, or maybe if you have a Twitter feed or something like that, or maybe want to send an email to someone and let them know. This, I think, is going to be a great opportunity to learn about what's happened in Haiti, Africa, what's happened in Nepal, Even, the issue of the Syrian refugees, which we've talked about before, that has been a conversation. And so, again, you can not only watch it, but you can own the DVD. And we have a link to lifethemovie.com, where they have a special bundle which includes a number of DVDs, which I would recommend. One that we've talked about before on this program, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. The Hope, which is the rebirth of Israel. And then, of course, the one we're talking about today, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. And if you're a supporter of the nation of Israel, if you certainly appreciate the good work that CBN University and CBN does, well, I would encourage you to find out a little bit more about some of the things that are available there as well. So let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Gordon Robertson right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There, on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town, was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gordon Robertson with us for just a few more minutes. And Gordon, I thought for just a minute we might talk about how people can support what you're doing. I know you have what's called CBN Israel. You can become a monthly member. Of course, I've mentioned this 3-film DVD bundle. Talk about some of the resources that are available and how people can support what you're doing.
CBN Israel is designed to support all of that CBN is doing in Israel. We have a news bureau headed by Chris Mitchell. We have daily news reports coming out of Israel and that support both the 700 Club and his program, Jerusalem Dateline. Then we do humanitarian work within Israel, primarily to Holocaust survivors, but also to the new immigrants making Aliyah, returning to the Jewish homeland. We help them get oriented into the society and into culture and get productive jobs and sort of see them along the way as they're transitioning into Israeli society. And we also do outreach into the Palestinian areas in Gaza and the West Bank. We're not particular about the religion of the people that we help. If they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or none of the above, if they're in need, we want to help them, and we want to do it in Israel. So the contributions go into all of that and also go into these documentaries. I want to change the narrative about Israel, change the discussion. The news headlines tend to be dominated with suicide attacks or knifings or the violence. And in all of that, you miss the real story of what's happening in Israel, that truly the desert has been made to bloom. The innovation that's coming out of Israel today is absolutely phenomenal, and what they've done to benefit both the internet, cell phone technology, agriculture, water technology, solar technology. It's truly the startup nation, and they're truly innovative. And then this the most recent movie we've done to life, how Israeli volunteers are changing the world. That's a side most people have never heard of, how Israel is doing so much humanitarian work in so many different places. I want to change the narrative and change the discussion so people get the full picture of what Israel is doing today.
Again, CBN Documentaries, that one to life. Michael Medved says it's a beautifully crafted, powerfully uplifting new film that will inspire its viewers at a soul-deep level. What a splendid and welcome piece of work with so much corruption, cynicism, and conflict dominating the news. It's wonderfully refreshing to be reminded that goodness, decency, and love can still work miracles in our hurting world. So Michael Medved has that to say about that. And changing the narrative, I thought I might come back to that. We talked about kind of the anti-Semitism, but what about the BDS movement, boycott, disinvestment, sanctions, sort of the anti-Israeli movement? It seems to me that, as you pointed out just a minute ago, these documentaries could change the narrative, maybe soften at least some hearts. Some hearts are so hardened towards Israel, I don't know that you can, apart from a work of God, see any difference. But I think for people that are open-minded, these resources could be very useful in the hands of some of our listeners, couldn't they?
I want to get this to as many eyeballs as possible, and I particularly want to get it onto college campuses because I think that's where the BDS movement is having the biggest inroads, if you will, and they use buzzwords. They use apartheid state. They use occupation as buzzwords, but what the BDS movement is actually doing is hurting the Palestinians. Just take the case of SodaStream. Here's a company that's remarkably innovative and a very popular product. They employ Palestinian workers at their plant, and they specifically set it up on the West Bank in order to do that. Well, the BDS movement has effectively shut that plant down, and unemployed now hundreds of Palestinian workers, and SodaStream had to move to another part of Israel where it's not permitted for them to employ Palestinians because they have to pass into Israeli territory. So it's obviously counterproductive if you're trying to introduce economy, if you're trying to introduce a good standard of living into the Palestinian territories. Why deny an Israeli company the access to markets? Why go through a whole boycott process? Because all that does is hurt the Palestinians. But I think BDS is essentially propaganda. It's coming out of the Palestinian Authority. It's also coming out of the Palestinian expat community, primarily in London. They're quite efficient in what they do in social media and in getting what I consider fake news out into the public. I want to tell the real story. And in these documentaries, I've emphasized again and again and again with the production team, it's very hard for anyone to argue with facts. Let's get the real facts out there. Let's not gild it. Let's not add to it. Let's certainly not take away from it. But if you see these documentaries, and whether that's The Hope or In Our Hands or To Life, you're getting the real history. In Our Hands, every piece of dialogue is supported by either the diaries or the recollections of the actual soldiers who fought that war. The research that went into The Hope, the rebirth of Israel, we checked out every sentence in the script, every scene, to make sure it was historically accurate, because we wanted to get the real story out there. When you know the real history, when the BDS movement tries to issue propaganda, you'll be prepared. You'll understand it for what it is. The real history shows that Israel has a right to exist. It's legal under international law. The League of Nations at the San Remo conference passed a resolution calling for the British mandate to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The UN recognized that, incorporated all of the League of Nations resolutions. So what Israel did was legal under international law. And from my point of view, it's high time for the international community to recognize it.
Well said. Again, the various DVDs are available. The CBN documentaries, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, The Hope, The Rebirth of Israel, and, of course, the one we've been talking about today, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. I would encourage you to get all three of those, and maybe even think of getting a couple of sets and sending them off to people that you know. And you can begin by even taking the trailer that we have available here and posting it on your Facebook page or on your Twitter feed. And Gordon Robertson, always great to have you with us. Thank you for what you're doing to change the dialogue, and look forward to the next opportunity.
It was great being with you, Kirby. I look forward to it.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to change topics again. We have Lathan Watts in studio with us. First question is, what about this motto, "In God We Trust"? As you might imagine, we've got some of these anti-God types of groups that want to make sure that you could never post the motto, "In God We Trust," even in like a classroom. So we're going to get into that. We're talking about graduations, and so we also have a suggestion for what you might want to say to the graduates. And, of course, Lathan in the past wrote a piece that appeared in the Daily Signal about this whole idea of separation of church and state and why the left is wrong about Thomas Jefferson's idea of the wall of separation of church and state. So we're going to have some fun talking about that and love to get your comments. Do you think "In God We Trust" should be taken off our coins, taken off our motto, and no longer even posted in the schools? Or maybe are we overreacting in our culture? I'd love to get your comments about that. So we're going to spend some time in the next hour talking about these issues and all sorts of religious liberty issues. So if you'd like to join us, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about what we've talked about, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me this hour. We're going to spend some time talking with our friend Lathan Watts. He's been on the program with us before, and we've posted a couple of his articles, one in the Daily Caller, Democrats in Minnesota fight God in the schools. And so I put that God in schools, and then another one on a graduation message. And if you go back, you can also find one that we've posted from him in the past, why the left is wrong about Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state. I notice we already have phone calls coming in about whether or not we should keep the motto, "In God We Trust." So I'd love to get your comments on that. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. I'll get to those in just a minute. Lathan is the Director of Community Affairs and Relations for First Liberty Institute, has worked in a number of staff positions over the years. Jeb Henserling is one stepping down. We had Bunny Pounds here the other day running for that particular case. Also, of course, with John Cornyn, and Texas Governor Rick Perry has his law degree from the University of Mississippi, as well as his Bachelor of Arts in History from Hardin University. And just great to have you back in studio again.
I'm glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's talk about In God We Trust. You wouldn't think that would be controversial. I understand that's the national motto, right? And
that's the rumor.
In the world could a suggestion that you could post a privately funded poster displaying the national motto, "In God We Trust," would be controversial? But I guess that's the world we live in, right?
Unfortunately so. You know, sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying these days. So that was sort of the point of this piece. There was a debate in the Minnesota legislature.
Yes.
Senator proposed, as you said, privately funding posters for classrooms in the state of Minnesota that had "In God We Trust." And it proved to be controversial in the Minnesota State Senate. A couple of Democrats rose in opposition. One particular comment that I chuckled at, Senator Marty, who said, "The money in my wallet has to say 'In God We Trust,' and I think that's offensive."
Okay, so he's got a problem with that. Of course, he could give back all the dollars that have "In God We Trust." You know,
exactly.
If he doesn't want to keep them, that's fine. I'm good. Yeah.
In the piece, I suggested, there was no word on whether or not he had rid himself of this offensive legal tender yet, but perhaps he could donate it to...
You're a good writer, by the way. I love your writing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoy the way you write some of these. You put your tongue in cheek and let it go.
It was firmly in cheek in this piece, for sure. Sometimes, like I said, you got to laugh. So, I suggested maybe he could donate it to a charity that actually serves the people of Minnesota. But, I mean, this is... there might have been a time in America when this would have been a unifying, nonpartisan,
right. This is not controversial 2 decades ago.
No, and it shouldn't be.
No,
I think a reminder to students in Minnesota or any classroom, frankly, that our nation was founded on trust in an authority higher than government is a good thing. And I think the kind of ludicrous debate in the state Senate just demonstrates why the wisdom of that motto and placing your faith in an authority higher than your government.
Now, again, to be fair, not all Democrats opposed it, but you do have the names of those that did, and so you can read this particular article. We're not surprised that our friends, and I put that in quotes, our Freedom from Religion Foundation had a problem with that, because they've been trying to take, as well as other groups have been trying to take "In God We Trust" off of our money for many years. They'd also have to sandblast it off of the Capitol, too, wouldn't they?
There's lots of places that they would be very busy if they were granted that authority. But fortunately, every time a court has ruled on this, it has upheld the constitutionality of it. It doesn't seem to stop them from trying. They a few years ago sent one of their many letters that they send every year. You know, they send thousands of letters a year, and they sent one to Chief Adrian Garcia in Childress, Texas. And in the piece I mentioned, Chief Garcia did what every American should do if you get a letter from Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is throw it away, ignore their demands, and call us, call First Liberty.
Yes, they did.
Chief Garcia, you know, after some really rough times for police, came up with the idea of placing that motto on their patrol cars as a symbol of unity with the community. This is something that we can all agree on.
So if you saw a police car, you'd see "In God We Trust"
on
the
on his
sticker.
Exactly, on their patrol cars. FFRF didn't like that, sent him a letter. He contacted us. He, of course, refused to comply. He put it on his squad cars, and pretty soon other people heard about it because of the controversy that FFRF stirred up. And now there are multiple departments across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, that have joined this movement. And so, this piece in the Daily Caller was sort of, like I said, tongue-in-cheek advice to people who are opposed to this. You know, be careful, because you may end up with more of it, you know, depending on how you go about opposing. That's exactly what happened with the decals on the patrol cars. And, could be what happens with "In God We Trust" posters in classrooms, too.
Let's see if we can for just a minute, and I'll take some phone calls because I want to give some of you a chance to express your opinion about whether or not "In God We Trust" could be in a public school, or whether or not "In God We Trust" could be on the bumper sticker of a car. But you can put "In God We Trust" on your car. And one of the things you and Kelly Shackelford and others have done is you have these like window clings, I guess is the best way to describe them. And it's available at First Liberty. I think his goal was, okay, if you got a problem, Freedom from Religion Foundation, with the motto "In God We Trust," we'll multiply, maybe geometrically, exponentially, the number of cars that will actually have those, not just police cars. So that's still available at First Liberty, isn't it?
It is, yes. FirstLiberty.org. You can find information on the sticker, on all of our cases. Great resource for a lot of information.
So again, if you'd like to get one of those, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But since we got some phone calls, might as well start taking those. We have a lot more to cover, but what's your thoughts about this idea of "In God We Trust"? We'll go to Georgia first of all. Carrie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Very good. I'd love to hear your comments.
Thank you. And this is one thing I would really love to comment about, because I'm 85 years old. I can cook. I can clean my house. I can take a bath. I can do many things. And it just saddens me to hear the voices of so many that is crying out, saying nothing, but they're controlling the people in their minds who would believe in God, and He is our only source. He is our help in the time of need and the time of trouble. And I think the United States of America need Him more. May not be on a dollar bill, but it needs to be in the heart of every man, every boy, every girl, and our children in school. We need to have something for them to focus their eyes on and ask questions about who is Jesus. What does He do? Why is He so important? Then you pinch yourself to see, is you a part of the man called Jesus?
Very good comment. We need to take a break, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. What about "In God We Trust" as a motto? Love to get your comments right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We often talk about worldviews, but do we know how they were formed through history? Professor Glenn Sunshine wrote a great book entitled Why You Think the Way You Do, The Story of Western Worldviews from Rome to Home. It helps us see the influence of worldviews through history, and he defines a worldview as the framework you use to interpret the world and your place in it. He begins by discussing the worldview of Rome, and by the end of the book, we return to the same worldview. Western civilization is a product of ancient Roman civilization plus Christianity. Glenn Sunshine argues that once you remove Christianity, the modern world reverted back to Roman society and a recovery of the ancient pagan worldview. Like Rome, we value toleration as the supreme virtue. The Romans lived in an oversexed society. So is our society. Rome practiced abortion. So does our society. Rome was anti-natal and made a deliberate attempt to prevent pregnancy. They focused on sexual enjoyment and did not want to bother with kids. In our modern world, birth rates in most of the Western democracies are plummeting. So how should Christians live in this world? Of course, we should live out a biblical worldview. Every generation is called to live faithfully to the gospel, and our generation is no exception. From history, we can see that the early church did live faithfully and transformed the Roman world. Christians produced a totally new civilization, Western culture. By living faithfully before the watching world, we will increase our credibility and earn the respect from those around us by living in accordance with biblical principles. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Lathan Watts in studio with us today, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Get to some of those phone calls in just a minute, but I'd love to get your comments about In God We Trust. And one of those individuals who was offended and opposed to this is Senator John Marty. He's up in Minnesota, so maybe some of our listeners know him, but he was the one that said it was offensive that the money in my wallet had to say, "In God we trust." But you came up with a line that probably got more laughs than anyone other than that, right?
I'm flattered that, yes, it has kind of gotten a little attention. But the following line after that quote just says, "The month of May is a beautiful time of year in Minnesota, but apparently they still have to deal with the occasional snowflake."
The snowflake. Such great lines in here. And another one that you talk about a little bit later is this kind of this 24-hour news cycle. You know, taking offense may soon supplant baseball as the nation's pastime, but it's becoming increasingly ineffective because explain a little bit more about that, because in some respects, maybe the election of Donald Trump has something to do with that. Do you think?
I think it's the election. I don't think it is the factor, but I think it's an example of to demonstrate the larger point in how the grievance culture is becoming more ineffective. Mm-hmm. Because you take what we have in a 24-hour news cycle, and it's for years it's been driven by someone is offended, someone demands an apology, cameras go to that person, are you going to apologize? Then it's the apology or the non-apology, and do you accept the apology? And then America elects a man who never apologizes for anything, ever.
Yeah.
You know, and not to say that that's necessarily the right attitude, but I think that was part of what appealed to people in Trump. It doesn't bother him, to be that you're offended, and I think that's an indication, along with the other examples in the article, that we might be reaching a tipping point in the culture, in the grievance culture, where it is sort of the boy who cried wolf moment, where people are just so tired of it that it becomes ineffective. That people just don't really respond to it anymore, or they come back even harder, and you actually, you the offended person, get more of what you're offended by.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're there yet, but I think we might be approaching a tipping point there.
Well, might be. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to the state of Illinois this time. WPEO and Sue. You're on with Lathan Watts. What's your point of view?
Well, I've got a couple. One is I graduated in 1959 from high school, and I'm 77 years old, and I never one day went to school with fear for my life, ever. And I grew up in middle America, and it upsets me that these people that want to take our freedom away and live by their rules, we had these rules long before they started doing all this. And it's just a different world that we live in today, and it's sad. I was just an MC at my ladies' breakfast at church, and I can tell you the Christians are happy, most of them. And I'm not saying people don't have their own problems, but if you have God, then you have someone that you can rely on. And if you don't, that's why these young people are killing people. They don't even know a God, evidently. I can't judge people, but I can just say this is such a different world. And I pray for my grandkids every day. And my son was an assistant principal. He's moved on to another job with schools. But when he was assistant principal, I worried every day for him. And fortunately, their school didn't have any problems. But, I don't know how parents can send their kids to school today, wondering there'll be more kids taught at home now, I think, with all this happening.
Yeah. And I was talking with some that were just saying that their child every day goes to school fearful, and that's terrible. But back to this issue of taking God out of the schools. I mean, I understand back in 1962 and 63, mandatory prayer and all that. But by the time you get to 1980, you have, Stone versus Graham, which says, it's kind of like this, can't even post the 10 Commandments in a classroom in the state of Kentucky. Because after all, the kids might read the 10 Commandments, they might believe the 10 Commandments, they might act on the 10 Commandments. I don't know, that sounds like a pretty good idea. In God we trust, put that motto up there. Some of the Democrats just got a real problem up there in the state of Minnesota because of that. I just think we need to come back to some of those basic principles if indeed we think that there is a possible solution to everything from school shootings to the kind of misbehavior in the classrooms today.
We just had a very tragic school shooting here in Texas, in Santa Fe, and we didn't get to this point in America overnight, and it won't be solved overnight. I think it's easy to try and grab any sort of solution because people are desperate because their kids are afraid.
Of course they are.
It's harder when you look at the big picture and the cultural issues that have been going on for many, many years and the declining value in human life.
Yeah.
That's not going to get fixed overnight. We didn't get to this point overnight.
No, we certainly didn't.
And, just like any part of your kid's education, it begins at home. And we have to really work with our kids and be sure that we're instilling in them the intrinsic value of every human life, and what that looks like for you as an elementary school, a middle school, a high school student. How you live that in your daily life. That every student in that school that you attend has value, including the kid that doesn't have friends, that gets picked on, and it's easy to either ignore that kid or, God forbid, join in pointing out, picking on someone. The hard thing to do is to stand up for that kid.
Right.
But if more and more children do that, or at the very least, if they suspect something is going on, tell someone in authority, a lot of these things I really do believe can be prevented. Don't rule out security measures and all those things that frankly, at this point, we need. But there's a much bigger issue at stake, and there's no simple solution to it. But it's a challenge that absolutely has to be met.
Last time we had someone sitting in that chair there, Foster Freeze, talking about Rachel's challenge, because that's something that Daryl Scott has done ever since his daughter, Rachel Scott, was killed at Columbine. And there are so many examples of reaching out to and providing a culture of affirmation and to really begin to cut off this cyberbullying and the marginalization and all the other kinds of things that take place in those schools. So certainly there are some solutions, and not one solution is going to be the answer, but I certainly think that when people stand up and say, I don't think we need the posting of the 10 Commandments, I don't think we need In God We Trust, or as we're going to talk about in just a minute, I don't think it's appropriate for someone to mention their faith in Jesus Christ at a graduation ceremony. I'm thinking, I don't know. What we're doing right now is not working. The old famous line from the doctor, how's this working for you? Not working very well. So maybe you need to come back to some of the basic principles here that we just talked about with Sue in just a minute. And let me take another phone call here. I think it's Melvine in Georgia. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Sir, it's not Melvine, it's Melvine.
Melvine, I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us.
God bless you. But if you will, you can call me Love Peacemaker, and that's for Jesus, because Jesus gave me that name. God the Father gave me that name. But I was calling in reference because there's so many today. I mean, the greatest thing is when you're being raised in the fear of God and the love of God, then you respect the things of God and you respect other people. But today you got a lot of people, it's all about themselves. They're all about their money. They're all about materialistic things, but they are not about the concerns of the people.
Yes.
But they don't want the name of God on the dollar, but they want the money. You understand what I'm saying?
Well said. Yeah.
But the word of the Lord says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all the other things will be added. But you got a lot of perpetrating going on, stealing and taking away from people, robbing people to fill their own pockets. But God is God, and he said the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord. So when I fear God, I'm going to do justice by God. But if I don't fear God, I'll do any and everything that I feel I can do. Because why? I'm thinking I'm God. I'm thinking I made myself. I'm thinking I formed myself. And I'm thinking I'm the head. And the word of God says Jesus is the head of the church. God is the Father, the head of him, and he's the head of the church. So God laid guidelines for us to follow. But you got a lot of people perpetrating the word of God, and they want to feel they saying and do what they want to say, and want people to be bound under their control, because that is witchcraft. The beginning of wisdom, the fear of God, disobedience, witchcraft.
Well, again, appreciate your comments. We have one of those mandatory breaks. We'll come back and we'll talk about what you might say at a graduation, another piece that Lathan's put together with. We'll be back right after this.
Sarita is a Point of View listener in Georgia, someone probably a lot like you. Listening to your program, she writes, has helped me realize that I do have the power to conduct change in my area and this nation. And with all of the online tools you provide, this power has become even more apparent to me. What can one person do? A whole lot, says Sarita. And then she says, and together we can get even more done. She's right. Sarita is right. This is a moment of opportunity, and together with you, Point of View is looking to accomplish a lot. This program and those online tools she mentioned will only continue being available if we hear from people like you this week. Join Truth Team 360. There are many levels. Check them out. Choose the size of the part you can play at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts with us. He's with First Liberty, and we have a link to that website. And if you'd like to get that window cling or learn a little bit more about some of the cases that they're involved with, certainly that is the case. But underneath that particular bio for him, you will see a section called Graduation Message. And that will take you to firstliberty.org. To the class of 2018, a free nation begins with people free to think for themselves. Now, I would never have pegged you as a speechwriter for graduation, but talk about how that came about, because this is another resource that I think would be very helpful for some of our listeners.
Certainly. So each year around this time, with graduations going on, it can be kind of a busy time around our office, because there seems to be almost every year some speaker, whether it's a valedictorian, salutatorian, even a guest speaker, occasionally, but usually the student speaker who is told by their school administrator that they can't mention anything faith-related in their speech.
So can't mention God, can't mention Jesus.
Exactly.
Probably can't mention the Bible the way they're going these days. Yeah.
So in a meeting, sort of talking about this, hey, it's graduation season, we should be ready. I don't remember who brought it up. Well, if we could write a graduation address to all the graduates out there, from First Liberty to the graduates, what would we want to say? And boss looks at me and says, "This has got you written all over it." So
you got to do it.
So I got to do it. So I was happy to.
Very
wrote
well
this
done. Yeah.
So it has, what we at First Liberty, consider some good advice for folks that are graduating high school right now. You're about to go off to college in the current environment that we're in. Just a couple of the highlights of it. Don't let anyone convince you that learning is confined to a classroom. Take responsibility for your own education. The greatest lesson any student can learn is learning to think for yourself. And that, as you mentioned in the title, a free nation begins with people free to think for themselves. Kids that are walking onto a college campus these days, it says later in the piece that sadly what passes for an education on most American colleges today is not the imparting of knowledge, but the indoctrination into a belief system. And depending on your point of view, you are going to be under the microscope on most college campuses these days. And so this was a way of us sort of giving them that information and trying to encourage them to stand firm. There's another line here that believing you're right is not the same as knowing your rights. You need to know what your rights are. You need to stand for them and defend them, and First Liberty is here to help with that. But it all came about because we typically get a case just about every year, and we have a new one right now that we just picked up over the weekend. A young man named Sam Blackledge, West Prairie High School in Illinois. He was the valedictorian, so perfect 4.0 grade point average. So think about all the work that went into this. He worked on his speech for weeks and was told literally hours before the ceremony that he could not give the speech as it was written, because in the speech he wanted to give thanks to God and give credit to his Savior and reference how his faith helped him accomplish all of these things. And think about this. You've worked for 4 years to get to this point. You've worked on this speech probably for weeks, and then just before the ceremony, you're put in this spot, and you got to decide right now, what are you going to do with your principal, or I don't remember the superintendent was involved, but
unbelievable.
Told that he couldn't say what he wanted to say, and part of the reasoning they gave him was we don't want this to be a religious ceremony, and then it was, well, we don't want people in the audience to think that you're speaking on behalf of the school district. And the student Sam even said when that was brought up to him, he proposed a compromise. Well, what if I give a disclaimer before I speak?
Yeah.
And they rejected that idea. Yeah. Told him you can say everything except Christ.
Isn't that amazing? Let me open up the phones again, because I want to get your comments, because it goes both ways. Let's say we have an Indian student who wanted to share about his Hindu faith, would you be offended? No, I'd say, well, that explains that. If he's a student and he's Arab background and he wants to talk about Islam, okay, I'm a big enough person, I can watch and listen to that. But somehow it just says that if you're a Christian and you want to give God the glory for the fact that you got a 4.0, you have a perfect academic record, you are the valedictorian, I think you've earned the right to say anything you want to say. And it does seem to me that every year at First Liberty, you get one more example of a young person who is told by well-meaning nanny state principals, superintendents, whatever, that they can't express their viewpoint. Well, then don't even have a valedictorian speech, because otherwise, if you're going to hide the very thing that allowed you to be successful, what value is there to actually stand in front of a group and talk about your success?
Well, and the law protects, and they have the right to do so.
Yes.
I mean, the Constitution's on their side. The law is on their side.
They're not an agent of the government at all. They're just a student.
And, I wasn't on the ground for this case, so I don't want to paint with too broad a brush for this specific case for these officials. But typically when we hear about these cases, it's usually one of three things. It is someone has received bad legal advice. School officials gotten bad legal advice. They are overreacting to the potential of a complaint from somebody, and so the overreaction is, okay, well, we just can't say anything. Or occasionally you have an educrat with an agenda.
Yeah.
I don't know what the specifics of Sam's case will turn out to be. We're exploring all of our options for that case. But even the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, has put out guidance on this exact issue. And it says, where students or other private graduation speakers are selected on the basis of a genuinely neutral, even-handed criteria and retain primary control over the content of their expression, that expression is not attributable to the school and therefore may not be restricted because of its religious or anti-religious content. To avoid any mistaken perception that a school endorses student or other private speech that is not, in fact, attributable to the school, officials may make appropriate neutral disclaimers to clarify that such speech, whether religious or non-religious, is the speaker's and not the school's. And that's directly from the Department of Education.
Yes.
And that's what Sam offered to do, instinctively.
Yes.
The right thing. And was not allowed to. So that's where sort of the impetus for what would we like to say if we were giving a graduation speech to all of our class of 2018 graduates out there, and that's where this piece came from.
Well, again, you can find that on our website or go to firstliberty.org. It's under the news section, but we've provided that. And again, to the class of 2018, a free nation begins with people free to think for themselves. And as I go through this, I love some of the points that you make. The greatest lesson any student can learn is learning to think for yourself. And one of the phrases I used to say is, don't let school get in the way of your education, which is one of those. And at a time when we have what is almost certainly an educational fraud, my commentary yesterday that appeared was called educational fraud, because if you look at the nation's report card, this is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They found that about a third of the nation's 12th graders tested proficiently or better in reading. Or put another way, 2/3 weren't reading at the 12th grade level. Only 1/4, 25%, were proficient in math, which again, turned the other way, means 3/4 were not able to compute at the 12th grade level. Well, nevertheless, the graduation rate in America is 80%. So you have all sorts of individuals that will be walking across the stages or have already walked across the stage to receive a diploma that really they didn't earn. So then when you have this one student who gets a 4.0, one of the best and brightest that the school has ever produced, and then you tell him at the end that he cannot talk about the reason for his success, you can see what a travesty this really was.
Absolutely. And this is the only high school graduation ceremony the student's ever going to have.
That's right.
The school ruined it for Sam.
Yeah.
He can't get that opportunity back. Now, he's a good kid. He's working with us. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. And I think that was really his main concern. And so we're going to look at all the options, and we'll work with the school district. We'll make sure that in the future the same thing doesn't happen to someone else.
Yeah. And again, I'd love to get Sam on here. Of course, we've The other day, I just sent in my check for the Coons cheerleaders, because that's still a case. It's you look at these high school kids now. The Coons cheerleaders are in college, and I think maybe even graduated from that point. But again, I just have supported First Liberty because I believe that we need to do that. And let me, just before we go to break, talk about that. If somebody is aware of a case like this right now that's unfolding right as we're broadcasting, they can call you at First Liberty, can't they?
Absolutely. Call us. Our contact info is on the website, firstliberty.org. If you go to the website, right at the top says there's a tab, Get Legal Help, and there's a little drop down you can fill out, give us the basics, and then we'll get in touch with you. But always better, prevention is better than cure. So if this is going on right now, you absolutely should get in touch with us, and maybe we can help you.
If you'd like to join us, we'll open up the phones again. Maybe you have some comments about In God We Trust, or Christians not allowed to talk about God on graduations. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We've got more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to do our Millennial Roundtable. Then we have Paul Kenger on, and we've talked a lot about Reagan. We're going to talk about some of his new material. Sammy Rodriguez will be with us. And, of course, Friday, our weekend edition, we'll have Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgiadis. So it is a great week, and we're just only 2 days into the week. So, again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We've been mentioning just briefly this graduation message, and actually, interesting enough, you can watch it. It's a little less than 4 minutes long,
And so you can actually see Lathan and Mariah and Brooks give that. And so, again, that is a video that some people might want to take. And there's a share button. There's a little arrow button. You could put it on your Facebook page, or you can put it on your Twitter feed or something like that. So, again, this is a great resource done by Stuart Shepard. Anybody that is familiar with some of the great videos he's done over the years, working with groups associated with Focus on the Family, you know, is another individual there at First Liberty with you.
We are grateful to have him. He is a great addition to the team. And so Stuart helped us record sort of a video version of this address, and we were able to get Mariah Bridges, one of our former clients, and Brooks Hamby, one of our former clients, both of whom had graduation remarks edited or censored.
Yes, they did, yes.
Give this speech to the current graduates. So it was great to see both of them. Again, Mariah's case was actually the very first case I worked on my very first day on the job at First Liberty Institute. Got a call and said, don't come to the office, go to the airport and fly to Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So
and
it was
very
good to
gifted
work with
young
them.
lady, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. So it was great to see them give parts of this speech, and so the video is a little bit of all of us giving the speech.
So again, it's a little less than 4 minutes, and again, you might want to watch it. Again, we have a link so that you can watch it there, and then I would again encourage you to click that little button. It has an arrow. There's a share button. You can put it on your Facebook page or put it on a Twitter feed or something like that. It'd be a lot of conversation that you could generate there as well. And Stuart Shepard, can I just brag on him? When you see him later, tell him I'm bragging on him again.
I
But
definitely
he
will.
does the stoplight, and anybody that's seen any of those stoplights, so creative, so well done. I know that he's going to bring a lot to the table there at First Liberty. We've appreciated his work over these many years as well.
He's a great addition. He and I will be working together on Memorial Day. Actually, we'll be in Bladensburg, Maryland, for what could be the last memorial service, Bladensburg World War I Memorial. So we'll be up there getting some video of that and talking to some of the folks from the American Legion about that case. And you'll probably see some video of that coming out from First Liberty very soon.
And we'll be talking about that with Kelly on Friday, because I was just thinking about that. We're coming up to Memorial Day, which is a week from yesterday. And that is a time when I always like to focus on the military issues. And, of course, Michael Berry has been involved in that as well. But I began to think about this, what happens if they want to tear down that memorial? Or one idea was, we'll just take the arms off the cross, What a great idea,
Right.
These people, I mean, you deal with some people that just don't seem to have any kind of common sense at all. I mean, that one just still is amazing to me. Let's take a cross and take the arms off the cross, and then that won't be offensive. How about to all of us Christians, how offensive that would be?
Well, and the whole impetus of that case is that it's on government property, and that's why it somehow violates separation of church and state. Well, it's only government property because the government took the property from the American Legion when they were building the highway.
Yeah.
And they went out of their way, literally, around this memorial because they wanted to keep it
Keep it, yeah.
So this Memorial Day, the disposition of that case is the Fourth Circuit has ruled that it is unconstitutional.
Yeah, and they want to tear that one down, but because the Fourth Circuit also covers everything in Arlington
National
Cemetery, right?
So
yes.
That's what makes this upcoming
Just
Memorial Day so special for the Bladensburg World War I Memorial, because if the Supreme Court doesn't grant cert and overturn the Fourth Circuit, this will be the last Memorial Day for that memorial.
Isn't that amazing?
Been there for 100 years.
Yes. So, again, we're paying attention to these issues, and I hope that you appreciate that. Our most recent appeal letter that just came out, and I received mine in the mail, was just, again, where we recount some of the stories that Kelly Shackelford has shared with us, as well as, of course, people like Michael Berry and a variety of other individuals that we've interviewed over the years. And so, if nothing else, just a good illustration of why we want to educate you about some of these religious liberty topics. Let's take another phone call or two, and we'll go to South Carolina. Elton, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, so I just happened to be coming from Somerville, and I just tuned in, and I just thought I would just call, and I believe that it has been God ordained that this happen because that this will usually happen. When you just call in, all of a sudden, you're on the air. But anyway, what I want to just make mention is this. And also, I want to say it, and again, I want to bring the question, to you, the national public. Okay, with all these school shootings that have been going on, specifically the school shooting, and every time one would happen, you would see all the political leaders that would get on TV, the sheriffs, the chief of police, the mayor, governor, and everything, and advising everybody to pray. But my thing is this. When prayer was taken out of school, that was the ingredient that they took out, which is the avenue to get to God. And it was a slap in God's face. And I'm asking myself because I'm very frustrated. When are these people who profess to be saved, sanctified, born again Christian, set apart from this world, who profess to know God and believe in God, is going to come to themselves and say, okay, we took prayer to school, so therefore God allowed the devil to come in and just do what he has to do. You see, my question is this. When are they going to see that?
Yeah, when are they going to see the fact that if you take God out of the schools, there's a vacuum? What goes in? It's a good question, I think, don't you think?
It is, and, correlation does not necessarily prove causation, but I think it's a very interesting to look at basically all the negative things that we measure in social statistics,
right,
and how they've increased over time as certain things have been taken out of schools. Preacher in my church is always fond of saying you can't take prayer out of school as long as there are tests being given. there are going to be kids praying in school.
Kids praying, right?
I guarantee you. But the caller raises a good point in that when something tragic happens, politician gets on TV and our thoughts and prayers are with you. Thoughts and prayers are with you.
Well, we can't pray at a graduation, can't mention God at a graduation, can't have In God We Trust at the school. But, boy, the minute we have a shooting, we didn't talk about prayers.
And everybody's back on their knees praying to God.
Isn't that something? Again, there are some great resources here, and since we're tight on time here, I had to kind of cut Elton off just a little bit because he had some great things to say. So call back tomorrow. We'll give you more opportunity for that. But we've posted this piece by Lathan on Democrats in Minnesota Fight God in Schools. It's just simply listed as God in Schools. Then, of course, we have the graduation message, which you can either read or actually watch on video. And I thought, just in the interest of time, let me mention last time we had Lathan on his April 12th issue, which was in the Daily Signal, Why the Left is Wrong About Jefferson's Wall of Separation Between Church and State. If we get this wrong once, we get it wrong every single day, it seems like. And this is why your piece is so helpful, because you take us through the history, marking, of course, the anniversary of Thomas Jefferson's birthday. So, again, just a very helpful piece that you put on available, and it's at the Daily Signal, of course, also available on our website, pointofview.net.
Exactly, and they can catch it on firstliberty.org as well. If you follow us on Facebook and any of our social media, it's still out there. You can read it there. I was grateful the Signal ran it.
Yeah. And you'll get some of those videos for us up there in Bladensburg, and we'll use those as well. Of course, we have Kelly Shackelford, your colleague, who will be here on Friday, and we'll be talking about that with Memorial Day coming up. So, Lathan, thank you for your good writing. We've got 3 Lathan Watts articles, more to come. So, again, great to have you in studio with us today.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have for today. And, again, if you did not have a chance to get through, I was kind of judicious in the phone calls today, but tomorrow we're going to have more of an open line. So if you would like to add some comments, we certainly do welcome those tomorrow here on Point of View. If you'd like to know a little bit more, find all of that on the website, pointofview.net. Most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.